It is my pleasure to welcome Michael Gurian to the Authors at Google series. And if you in the audience have questions after the talk, please be sure to use the microphone so that our friends on YouTube can hear you. Michael Gurian is a social philosopher, corporate consultant, family therapist, and a New York Times best-selling author of 25 books, including Boys and Girls Learn Differently, The Wonder of Girls, and The Wonder of Boys. As the co-founder of the Gurian Institute, he has spearheaded a national effort to provide communities and corporations with training in brain-based gender issues. Today, Michael will be discussing his newest book, Leadership and the Sexes, which some of you lucky Googlers in the audience received a copy of today. And now, for the man of the hour, Michael Gurian.
Thank you, Alana. Well, thank you very much. It's great to be here. The Gurian Institute, what we do is almost exclusively related to gender. So with Leadership and the Sexes, we're focusing on corporations, firms, anything related to men and women. So we're science-based. We have a real science-based perspective, kind of hard science-based, and I'm going to show you scans, brain scans that'll show you how the male and the female brain operate differently. And we have kind of a metaphor that we use, which I'm going to read to you. It's quite brief, and it's kind of funny. Some of you may have heard it. Laugh anyway if you've heard it, because I want to build a metaphor. So this is a radio conversation between a U.S. ship and Canadian authorities. Could be any countries, right? That's not what's important, but check this out. So Canadian authorities, please divert your course 15 degrees to the south to avoid collision. U.S. ship, no, we recommend you divert your course 15 degrees to avoid collision. Canadian reply, negative, you have to divert your course. U.S. ship, this is the captain of a U.S. Navy ship. Change your course now or countermeasures will be taken. Canadian reply, this is a lighthouse. Some people haven't heard it, good. Okay, so this is our metaphor. The metaphor is the lighthouse and the ship. To us, since we're really science-based, we're very into the hard science of it, how the male and the female brain operate differently. All diversity accepted, and I'm going to even show you exceptions to the rule on scans today, okay? Still, a male and female brain do operate differently, and this is something that's been studied and is really coming to the forefront now in the last, say, decade. It's what we call the lighthouse. These are the natural differences between the male and the female brain that every corporation, every firm has got to bring into the mix, and from which all sorts of tools can be developed to help men and women in the workplace, all right? And these are the natural differences. That's the lighthouse. From our point of view, this lighthouse is sitting there. It's been developing for 1 million years, depending on when you start human evolution. About 1 million years, it's been building, and it's sitting there. And this lighthouse, I'm going to hope to prove to you within the next hour or so, this lighthouse isn't moving very much. This lighthouse is still sending off a lot of the same signals about male and female that it was sending off before. These are not culture-based signals, these are nature-based signals. And we only take information to teach this from brain research, and that brain research comes from all over the world. So the cultural elements we would see as the ship. The ship is constantly moving. And in the area of gender, we call the lighthouse gender and we call the ship gender roles. And that's the stuff that keeps moving. And of course, every generation has seen, I'm 50 years old, in my 50 years, I've seen a huge swing in gender roles, right? In that 50 years, all of you have seen a huge swing in gender roles. That's a moving ship. That will keep moving, and that will depend very much on the culture that we live in. But the lighthouse, the male-female differences, that we got to deal with now because it's sitting here, and we now have the brain research to show that these differences exist all over the world. So I will not tell you what to do with the ship, but we love telling you more and more about the science and then helping you develop tools. Okay, now this is a little different vision than some folks, if you went to grad school or if you went to college or if you've been engaged in looking at these issues. This is a different vision than the sort of traditional vision of the last 40 years, which is that if you talk about biology and gender or brain differences in gender, this will be bad for women. We've disproven that. because we've been teaching this for about 20 years. We have 85 trainers teaching this. We've disproven that it's bad for women. In fact, we've proven it's good for women. But the vision is different. And that requires us to be a little bit, well, this is the little quote. It requires us to be sort of innovative and be forward-thinking. And I love this quote from Justice William O. Douglas. Our proudest boast has been a system that makes belief in the unorthodox a permissible way of life. Ideas like the people who have them need expression, the marketplace tests them, accepting a few, rejecting many. And this actually pertains to what I'm going to teach with you today and what Leadership in the Sexes is about. I and my co-author, Barbara, could not have written this book 10 years ago because we hadn't yet been able to test this out in tech companies and financial services companies and across the board. But the marketplace has tested it, and it works. And in fact, the last few chapters have a whole bunch of data, success data from companies. But it's for some people, it's an idea that still draws controversy because we're saying, hey, let's pay attention to this stuff, and this stuff is hardwired. So a lot of the issues that get covered, senior leaders and managers, gender tools, retention and advancement of women. It's a big deal, and this is a new tool to put into the toolbox to help with retention and advancement of women. And it also gives attention to male issues. We're even. We're not trying one or the other. It's very science-based, and as you'll see in the data, there are bottom line and competitive edge advantages. In other words, companies make more money, which is crucial because retaining more women, because a lot of these issues get dealt with. We do it through brain science, so I'm going to give you a friendly look at brain science, and of course this is tip of the iceberg. People wonder, okay, so this Lighthouse, how did it get there? On the X and the Y chromosomes are markers for our gender. And this is sort of crucial because that's step one. We used to think it was all socialization, right? So it was all nurture. We now know, especially since the mapping of the genome, we now know that it's nature and nurture, that both are crucial, and that some stuff comes from nature. So the first step is the chromosome markers. And what happens is that the Y chromosome differentiates the male brain from the female brain within the first 5 to 6 months in utero. The Y chromosome stimulates that male brain and that male body to differentiate, because we all sort of default start out female. But it's a Y, and the Y has a number of markers on it that say, okay, you have to create a male brain and a male body. So the first thing that happens is the testicles need to drop. The testicles drop, the chromosome markers say do this. Once the testicles drop, you get step two. Step two is that for 3 to 5 months in utero, that male baby, that male fetus gets a bunch of hits of testosterone. And of course, I'm giving you the tip of the iceberg because there's a lot going on. But that's what tends to differentiate. That's step two. So you've had 2 natural steps for differentiating brains and bodies in utero. And then the third step, of course, is nurture and socialization. The baby is born, and once the baby's born, then the culture says, how should we raise this boy, and how should we raise this girl? So those are the 3 steps, and they can end up resulting in, and here are some scans. I like to start out as quick as possible with scans. So here are scans of, these were provided by Daniel Amen, who's quite a fascinating fellow. He's done 38,000 scans, has written a bunch of books. He's a neuropsychiatrist, and he's on our advisory board. These scans show a female brain at rest and a male brain at rest. So your female brain is on your left, the male brain is on the right. You can see a significant difference between these brains. And remember, he keeps replicating this. All sorts of people have replicated this. Reuben Gur, all over the world, if they scan male and female brains doing certain tasks, we see a significant difference. And so this is just the brains at rest, because it's very easy to see. And if you're thinking, okay, what's a brain at rest? You are, well, I noticed outside volleyball or whatever, right? Everyone's working, and you've worked a lot of hours, and your brain is starting to kind of nod off. You're getting really pretty tired. You need to recharge. You need to do something. Male brain, as you can see, just about completely shuts off. It goes into this rest state on your right, where one thing we like to joke about is that the little spot in the middle, the little teeny spot in the middle, is the remote control spot. So that's just a little joke. But you can see that most of the rest of the brain has shut off. At the bottom, what you're seeing is brainstem functioning, lower limbic, so it's toward the bottom of the brain, digestion, breathing, just you got to stay alive, so you got to have some brain functioning. But most of the rest of it shuts off. Female brain, she's in the same rest state. She's tired. She needs to recharge. She's worked 10 hours. But look at how much of that brain is still active. So you have the cerebral cortex or the neocortex, whatever you want to say, about the top of the brain that has the 4 lobes. You have the limbic system in the middle, emotions, sensorial stuff, and you have the brainstem at the bottom. She's got activity in all of those. So if you've ever wondered, and a great application of this, we have a tool for this actually, a running meetings tool. But think about a meeting. What do some of the guys start to do in a meeting when it's getting boring? They often will do it with something, like a pencil, or they'll tap their feet, or they'll kind of pull on something. Anything, the tapping of the pencil is very, very common. The body starts to move a little bit. Well, what we think is going on is these brains are starting to go to a rest state. The meeting's gotten boring, etc. Someone's talking a lot, talk, and they're zoning out on this talk. And they're trying to keep their brains awake. You tend to see, with women, more women, even though they're bored and they're tired and they want to recharge, you still tend to see them taking more notes, trying to nod their heads, trying to pay attention and keep eye contact with people. And this can be a microcosm of male-female issues, because especially as that male brain goes to the rest state, it's sort of emptying out of blood flow. What if a woman or a very sensitive guy, it could be anyone, is talking right now and start seeing these guys do this, or start seeing these guys tap and look around the room? It can actually create a lot of problems, and it creates a lot of problems for men and women, because also guys they'll really want to block out, because they're in this rest state and they're trying to block everything out, so they'll squint or frown, and the woman who's talking will see that as something very negative, and that she's not accepted and not valued. And this is a microcosm of what can go on. Well, I don't think we really understood it from a brain-based perspective until we looked at these scans and said, wow, when these brains get bored, the males are just about completely shutting off. So of course they're having and the females are having a different reaction to just this moment at work. So that gives you, I'm going to show you, by the way, I'm going to show you scans of exceptions. One thing that's important to say is that the term we use is bridge brains, that there are, you'll find, for instance, in the tech world, there are going to be a number of women who will scan, who sort of bridge genders, in the sense that their brain scans a little more male. And in a number of professions, more in social services, you see a number of men whose brains scan more female. And it doesn't mean they're not men or women. We're beyond the stereotypes. It's about the brain scanning a bit more like the other. And the more female brain you are, with all that activity, one of the things you're going to tend to have is more verbal emotive activity. You're going to tend to hold more eye contact and try to connect, build rapport, and so on. Let's go deeper. So female brain, you will have between 15 and 30% more glucose metabolism. So we got to remember, and this is crucial to say, that we're not just taking brain research from one city. We're taking brain research from all over the world. So this is a lighthouse. Wherever you go, you're going to find that the female brain has more firing in more different places. There also tend to be more verbal centers. When the testosterone hits happen in utero, more of the right side of the male brain develops what we call visual spatial or spatial mechanical centers. There are a number of words used for them. Someone was telling me today that on YouTube that it's about 70% male, and was telling me about 70% male viewership, 30% female. So viewing, watching something is visual spatial, as opposed to reading something. And in fact, there are males who write a lot and read a lot, like me, obviously there are, but you will tend to see more verbal centers in the female brain. So when you measure reading, writing, and speaking, and the words produced, on average, you tend to find more words produced and more words read by female and more visual by male. Females also have greater sensorial experience. So, more nerve fibers. So it's some kind of a funny thing that some people see as stereotyping, but I really don't. I have 2 daughters and a wife, and I go shopping. And for them, it's a sensorial experience. And this has nothing to do with gender roles. Both of them are incredibly successful girls. It's not about that. They just love the sensorial experience of shopping. They like to touch things. They like to try them on. They like to see how the colors match. And someone like me, right, is the guy that's sitting in the chair, you know, waiting for them, or goes to the electronics because I'm not getting as much of a hit off of these sensorial things. And if I go shopping, more typically male, I go for what I'm going for. You know, I went for shoes, so I went and I got shoes, and I get out. Less sensorial experience. Also, more crosstalk between hemispheres, and this has a lot to do with negotiation. We have actually a whole chapter on negotiation, a whole tool built around looking at this, how males and females negotiate. We negotiate quite differently. We can all become each other, sure, but we negotiate somewhat differently. And one thing that females do is they connect a lot of stuff in their minds that males don't realize they're connecting and may not be paying attention to. So crosstalk between the hemispheres is a big deal, and there's more connectivity in the female brain between a lot of these different centers. So this is 1 million years of human history. We are bringing these different brains to work, and one of the things we see a lot in retention and advancement of women, even in recruiting, is how is it presented to women, and how are women valued, and how are conversations with women valued, and the things women often want to talk about. And we often have to train men to be holding eye contact and to be listening and catching and trying to see the gems in what women are saying. Because women very often, obviously there's some very talkative men too, but I think you know what I mean. Very often women will have 4 or 5 things they're developing at the same time. They're not just staying on the one task. They're taking data from here, they're thinking about this. You know, you ought to look at this, and what do you think about this? And that, there are gems that emerge. And it's an incredible part of female talent that often gets missed by men who are not trained in it. And so they just shut these women off. The women feel devalued, and they start distancing. Okay, male brain, there's greater activity in the cerebellum. So like the cerebellum is a doing center of the brain. And this stuff was set, again, through chromosome markers and in utero. So it's not as if suddenly the guys we're working with are going to not want to get up and do something every however minutes they need to get up and do something. That's going to keep going, and that's going to go on all over the place because they have a more active doing center. So they want to do action. Okay, we talked for 2 minutes. Let's move on. Let's do the action. And that's an important part of male. And the more reliance on spatial mechanicals, I'm going to give you 2 funny stories. One is the story we like to tell that we got from a little book. And anyone who grew up male or any woman who had brothers, you will recognize this. These 13-year-olds who would go into the basement, shut the lights off, and throw metal-pointed darts at each other. And that was their way of playing and of being happy and of caring about each other. They didn't talk a lot. They loved to throw metal-pointed darts. And certainly one of them would get hurt. It would happen. They'd turn on the lights, and they'd, ow, I got hurt. And everyone here, I'm sure, if I will ask you, so do you think these guys stopped playing this game because it was dangerous? Oh, it's dangerous, we should stop playing this game. Of course not. No, they wore goggles. They just went ahead and got goggles and wore goggles. Spatial. They're relating to each other through objects moving through space. And you will see this constantly with males. I spent 2 years researching and living in Turkey, 2 years in India, in Hyderabad. Always constantly seeing the young guys, whatever age, and even the dads, if they still got the energy, out there kicking a ball to relate. They use this physical object that moves through a set amount of space to relate to each other. They're not as verbal. They don't look each other in the eye as much. They don't tend to use as many words. So they often need objects to help them relate. And the object, in this case, were the darts. Another one we saw, I have this little Wall Street story. My co-author has film of this. They were filming Wall Street, and they were watching the guys, while doing their work, throwing these little balls to each other. And it kind of kept their brains sharp, right? Kept their brains out of the rest state. They were relating to each other while doing their work. And there were some women who were having to dodge these balls being thrown to each other. Well, that's just a microcosm of it. And until the women understood that this was not the guys trying to do something bad to the women, this was how they kept their brains alert, and they're very spatial. So this is how they relate to each other, by using these objects. Okay, so that's spatial mechanical. And then males tend to be less inductive in their processing. So what we have there is they're less diverse data absorbed, especially if it's sensory or emotive. The future of the workplace is both male and female, and one of the gifts that women bring is that they access all sorts of sensorial and emotive data, emotional information of what's going on, that males often don't access. And we have a story in the book of a negotiation where there were 2 men and a woman in this negotiating team, and there were it was $50 million was on the line, and they thought they had it. The 2 guys thought they had it, and they had convinced the other team from the other company. They had the deal. And the woman said, I think you missed a lot. Actually, I don't think we convinced him at all. She had picked up a bunch of sensorial and emotive cues from the other negotiators. The guys didn't believe her, and they lost the deal. And this is a really neat story that my co-author tells. That's instructive, I think. And we sort of hope that as teams get into this and they look at it, they'll say, oh, it would be really smart to have both males and females in negotiations because you're picking up different cues. So a couple things to know. Men tend to be totally left-sided. If you may wonder why guys in general like to get to the point, one reason is that it's all happening. The language is all happening in a certain part of the brain. It's not happening in 6 or 7 parts of the brain. That's worth noting because that won't change, and that's worldwide. Women tend to use both sides, and that's one of the reasons women tend to be more verbally fluent. That includes reading and writing. Here now is male and female brains when listening. So this may seem subtle, but I'll explain it, and it's actually not. Males are on the top, females are on the bottom. And you'll notice that more of the brain is used by females to listen. So if you look at all the red spots, and orange spots, look at the top at the males. Generally, there's 1 spot being used to sort of simplify. Bottom, you see how there's more for the female. A couple different spots of the brain being used in all the different views, posterior and anterior. Well, this is a big deal. Training men and women to listen, and especially training men who may not have gotten training before in how to listen can be crucial because we, including myself, don't come at it with as much of our brains listening. We listen for a while and then we're done, right? We did that. Female brain, if you've wondered why, and this is a signal often men will miss, women will just keep listening. Okay, so switch gears. Now it's a man talking. He's talking and he's talking and he's talking and he's talking, and she's nodding and she's listening. She's got different parts of her brain listening, but she's actually thinking about 2 or 3 other things because he's incredibly boring right at this moment. But she just keeps listening, and then that conversation ends. And he just misses the fact that she was listening, but the signals she was sending out were very nice signals, but he really hadn't made much of a connection because she had gotten bored. But you can see it because her listening skills and also socialization, of course, affects that. With males, we don't tend to naturally listen as well in general, and so these brain scans, I think, show us. And in trainings and all the work, gaining listening skills can really help, because what ends up happening is after a year or two, like a number of young women are recruited into corporations, and $100,000 is spent on training these young women, right, to come into the corporation. And over a period of 1 or 2 or 3 years, they meet up constantly with men who are not listening to them, and they don't feel valued. And that's the primary reason women leave corporations, is they don't feel valued, and you can use many words for that. And so they go and find another corporation where their gems will be listened to. And so it's a big deal, and when we show people the brains, they'll go, oh, wow, yeah, huh. Okay, few more fun things. If you've ever wondered, and this I'm sure will bring up for people during the Q&A, this will bring up for you questions about engineering and male, female in engineering, so I'm ready for that question. The male brain starts out at an advantage if culture and nurture don't get involved. One of the things that especially tech companies are dealing with now, of course, and will keep dealing with, is that the parts of the brain in the inferior parietal lobes that are used for things like spatials, which includes estimating time, judging speed, distance, differences in directional focus like maps, geography, that kind of stuff, those parts of the brains, especially on the right side, are more developed in general in males. And for technology and science, these show up in three-dimensional thinking. Now, they don't actually show up in math and numerical calculation, and this is very important because the social dialogue has generally been that, well, males are better at math science. Actually, in numerical calculation, which would be accounting or anything having to do with numbers, males and females actually test out the same. It's in the spatials, and this is what technology is going to be dealing with over the next 20, 30 years. In the spatials, which is abstract, three-dimensional thinking in your head, that males tend to test out better at. Well, that's a basic for engineering. So we're going to have, I'm sure you'll want to bring it up in the Q&A, there are going to be some interventions that already are happening now and will continue to happen to try to bring more females and more female brains in to this dialogue. But we can't make the change until we deal with the fact that there is a brain difference. And this always brings some form of controversy. If someone says this, even with all the brain scans showing it, people will get angry and they'll say, no, there can't be any natural differences. Our point of view, remember the William O. Douglas quote, our point of view is go forward into the next level of the dialogue. The next level of the dialogue is we do start out with some differences in the averaging. Now what will we do? As opposed to, there are no differences. It's all socialization. So I'll be ready for your Q&A on that. Brain chemistry, big deal. Big deal. Oxytocin, testosterone, these chemicals are a really big deal. And they're happening constantly. And we talked about the meeting. So here's a fun did you know. When men and women walk into a meeting, meetings are inherently stressful. So already men and women walk into the meeting with different brain chemistry. Males walk in with more testosterone. Females walk in with more oxytocin. Testosterone's an aggression chemical. Oxytocin's a bonding chemical. There are some incredibly aggressive women, and there are some incredibly, wonderful bonding guys, right? That's all a definite. At the same time, men are still walking in with more aggression, and women are still walking in with more consensus building and an attempt to bond, and that's what oxytocin does. To give you an example, and this is really a fun story to tell, you can test this out to see oxytocin. Let's just say that in your family somewhere you have two males, let's say a father and a son, hypothetically, let's say a mother and a daughter. You four walk into a home that just had a baby. So there's the other mom, let's say, sitting on the couch, could be dad, whoever it is, holding the baby. All four of you walk in. Tendency will be for who is going to tend to walk over to the baby and the mom? The males or the females? The father and the son or the mother and the daughter? The mother and the daughter. Some of you are thinking, I don't want to admit that it's the mother and the daughter because there'll be some bad thing will happen here. No. What's happening is, right, because gender is very controversial. What's happening is that the sound of the cooing of the baby, the smell in the home, all of these sensorials stimulate the bonding chemical. And so the bonding chemical floods through the system of the mother and the daughter. And they move over, right? They're stimulated by this, and they move over, and they, what a beautiful baby, and so on. And the dad and the son, sure, they're stimulated. They're great guys. But they're not as oxytocin-driven. So they kind of will tend to sort of stand here and go, good job. Yes. Great baby, And some of that is, of course, socialization. I mean, you certainly, socialization absolutely matters. And so socialization teaches the father and the son what to do. And so the other father comes out and they start talking about sports or whatever it is. That's the socialization part. But the oxytocin part is the oxytocin part. Well, think about that. And then in a meeting, when there's any stress, the female system floods with more oxytocin, which is a bonding chemical. The male system floods with more testosterone. The stress stimulates testosterone. There's a wonderful scientist, Tracy Shores, also on our advisory board. We use a lot of her research. She's at Rutgers, and so she's shown the differences between males and females in stress situations. Well, if you're in a meeting and it gets stressful at all, have you noticed that some of the men will start interrupting, which is an aggression behavior? Or some of the men who were shy, let's say introverted, had their eyes down, when they get, they get angry about something, let's say, or there's a conflict, now they'll hold the eye contact and they'll start getting a little closer, which is a way that testosterone likes to try to put other people in their place. Especially with women, when the men start interrupting, that's pretty aggressive. And women, quite often when they leave corporations, they say, well, I was not valued and heard, and I was constantly interrupted by these guys. And guys don't realize it, right? Because the guys are in a situation that's stressful. So they're responding to the stress in a very natural way. I'm going to become more aggressive. You're going to see better what I've accomplished. You're all right, but here's what I've accomplished. I'm going to talk to you about what I've accomplished. Another way this can manifest is that an idea, a beautiful idea that may have come from a softer-voiced woman, could be a male, but quite often a woman, who had this idea and sort of talked about it, but sort of said it in a way, was like, well, I have this idea, and it's such and such, and what do you think? And then there's a little stress created. 20 minutes later, this idea is repositioned by a guy. And we could blame him for it. I don't. This, to me, is nature. There's a stressful situation. He's becoming naturally more aggressive, and he's promoting his idea. Well, it may not have been his idea, but it flooded, it moved through the system, and he forgot that it was said 20 minutes before by her, and she said it in such a way that was trying to build more consensus, and that wasn't as aggressive as maybe she ought to have been. So part of what happens is women get helped in saying, hey, this is where I'm at right now. And a year later, this is one of the things that's in the back of her mind, that she was not respected, etc. Well, this meeting I'm using as the microcosm today of so much else, because it is a place where this oxytocin difference and the testosterone difference can show up. So, and the last thing I'll say about that is that women tend toward what a consensus building, I call it an intimacy imperative. And women will tend to get more worth than men realize, more sense of self-worth through their bonds, and more sense of value through bonds. And males will tend to be more performance imperative oriented. In other words, this is how I've performed. This is how I'll get my self-worth. My bonds are important. And I'm bracketing out my bonds with family. Family bonds are a different kind of nature, right? I mean, those are obviously crucial to everybody. I'm talking about in the workplace. And we have a story in here that I found really touching from Pam Gomez-Gill, who worked in the tech sector for 30 years as a manager. And she said she noticed this in that when men left a company, they would leave the company. And she often found that when talking with other women, the women would be sort of missing some of their bonds in that previous company. And so there would be dialogue about those bonds they were missing in that previous company. She rarely heard that dialogue with the guys. They moved on to new performance and a new system, and they tried to master a new system. So I thought that was just an interesting story. Okay, now, before we get off the brain stuff, male and female brains that scan toward the middle of the gender brain spectrum. I mentioned those, bridge brains. That's a term I developed for them. Bridge brains, you could say whatever you want. There's great research from England, and then Daniel Amen has done some as well, that shows that some of us scan toward the middle, and the research from England shows about 1 in 5 women, around 1 in 7 men. So we would call these folks exceptions to the rules. And I have, in the back of this, there's a little test you can take. So I took my own test, and I test out at about 65% male, 35% female. So I'm a little more to the middle than Arnold Schwarzenegger, your governor, let's say. I don't know him, but the image of Arnold Schwarzenegger would be he might test out a little more male. Me, the kid who always got beat up and was constantly thinking and writes a lot of words, I'm testing more toward the middle. So about 1 in 5 women, and I'm going to now show you a scan. So now it's harder to scan bridge brain women because the female brain is so much more active at all times that it's harder to scan. But you can scan bridge brain males at rest. So now, remember that male brain, it's on your right when it went to that rest state and it just shut off. Here's a bridge brain male in the rest state. Bridge brain male in the rest state. So when my brain shuts off, let's say, I tend to be a little more active and I would scan out a little more like the female brain. And you remember the female brain, and these are in the book too, by the way, so you can show them to folks. The female brain had more activity. Well, the bridge brain male has more activity. But the more extreme male brain or the more typical male brain shuts down and shuts down. So it's important, if this is going to be, if we're serious about this, it's important to note that there's a broad spectrum. And there are 3 billion ways to be male and 3 billion ways to be female. So it's a broad, diverse spectrum of male and female. And some folks are toward the middle, and some folks are toward the edges. So what ends up happening is that this stuff gets used, and Leadership in the Sexes is set up. First part teaches the brain. Next part is gender tools, gender-friendly meetings, negotiations, communication, conflict, how to improve all of it by using tools because you understand each other, and then looking at retention and advancement of women, mentoring systems, things that are needed in order to bridge some of the gaps that we have and some of the issues that we're facing in corporations. So here are some quick hints, and I'm looking at my time because I want to make sure to have questions. Some quick hints for women. After looking at all of this stuff and looking at all this data, by the way, I should say in the last couple chapters, like most folks are very data-driven now, as we all should be. And in the last couple chapters, you're going to see data from a number of corporations that taught this gender diversity, that taught how different the males and females operate, and how much money they saved. Deloitte Touche is a financial firm that reported over a multi-year period saving like $190 million a year because they retained this female talent that they had spent that 100,000 on, right, in the first 2 years. They retained them. And one of the things that companies like that found is that some things you got to go deep, but some things you got to look at right away, and some things women have to look at right away is that the politeness, which is part of the oxytocin and the consensus building. It's inauthentic for women and men to be told they have to become each other, right? I mean, that's been tried, and you've got to learn each other's skills, but do women really want to have to become men to succeed? Or do men want to have to become women? And is that logical? If the brain-based research is correct, it's not going to happen. There's going to be some bridge brain women who are going to seem very like men, and there are going to be some bridge brain men who are going to seem very like women, let's say. But the majority of us are probably not, and for all of us, authentic leadership is the key. All of this neuro-business is leading toward authentic leadership. So women and men both have to walk a line because all of us need to adapt, right? We have to adapt to our environment and at the same time stay authentic. Here are some things by which we think women can do that. If women who are finding that they're not being heard, or people are thinking that they're weak in some way, or especially men are thinking they're weak because they're trying to bond so much, de-emphasizing the I'm sorry and providing more performance stats. De-emphasizing, oh, I'm sorry, yeah, you were talking. De-emphasizing that, being a little what we might call stronger or a little more toward the male side of the spectrum. And specifically, so you don't have to change who you are, specifically showing your performance. And that's something that women have a harder time doing than men. And that is true wherever you find business. And there are exceptions to that. And be patient with men talking about their prowess and with them throwing objects around. Be patient with that, because they're doing their thing. Be more data-driven when a man zones out. If you're in a meeting, a negotiation, or anything, and you see one or two of the guys starting to tap a pencil or starting to, or they're starting to squint and frown when you talk, which seems devaluing to you, think about, maybe that brain's about to go to a rest state. I might be talking too much, saying way too many words. I got to get back to the data. Because that brain, especially if that's a brain you would identify as not being a bridge brain, right? That's a very spatial guy who doesn't talk a lot. That brain probably needs us to get back to data. And say, what do you think instead of what do you feel? This is just a good clue to dealing with guys even in marriage. And I'll do a quick hints for men, and then I want to take questions. If we're going to really cross these bridges and value the people we're working with, we need to listen more patiently than we think we should. So even if our brain's going to a rest state, try to listen more patiently. Make eye contact, nod our heads. These are just little communication differences. Something verbal, I see, I get that, I see what you're getting at, or are you getting at such and such, right? Rather than just letting yourself get to the state where you're like this. Be there. And it's very important for males to see I'm sorry and other polite, self-deprecating phrases as rapport building, because a lot of what women are doing is building rapport in order to do their work. And these phrases are ways that they can be non-threatening and build rapport. So there's one last one I want to give you. It's, no, I think this is, actually, I think these will come up in your Q&A, so I won't do that. The website is genderleadership.com, and you'll find a bunch more stuff on there. So give me some questions. So what do you think about all this? Because I know you all have limited time. Go ahead.
When working with a mixed group.
Oh, I think they need you to use the microphone. Could you come up? And I will say, remember, this is the tip of the iceberg.
When working with a mixed group, do you think it's better to do both things, to slant more on the one side than the other, because one group is better understanding both?
Well, what we've found, so he's saying in working in groups, do you lean one way or the other? What we found is that when folks get really into it, and they get into this vision, and they get training, or they do book studies, or whatever they do to deepen their understanding, that everyone who's doing it is intuitively already very smart. And once they get more information and more tools, then each individual authentically utilizes the information and the tools and does generally what's needed. Now, the tools are still teaching certain skills, but the first thing I would say is that we're not wanting to move the gender dialogue over to, well, in every situation that looks like this, you should do this. It's really very, sort of, I'm the leader, or I'm the person working. I'm going to take in all this information. I'm then going to look at I'm going to say 10 people I'm working with on the team, just throw out 10. Let's say it's 5 men and 5 women. Okay, I'm going to really think about them, and we're going to have a dialogue in the team about this. We're all talking about it, and so we can see, oh, so-and-so's kind of a bridge brain. I mean, this is what often happens. And I'm not much of a bridge brain, and and so the lingo gets in there, and there's talk, and there's dialogue. And then a few weeks later, or whatever it is, the meetings change, and it's sort of organic. And you will know what to do. In a team of 5 men and 5 women, you'll tend to ascertain where they are on the spectrum, and then you'll tend to adapt to them. And people say, oh, well, I can't do that. I'm already working 12-hour days. I can't spend like 5 hours adapting to people. It becomes natural. Go ahead.
I wanted to hear if studies have been done about bridge brains and the causes. Do males with bridge brains have more estrogen, and women with bridge brains have more testosterone than most of their own gender? And along those lines, I wondered if people with bridge brains have bridge brains sometimes, and at other times fall more readily into their gender category.
Okay, I'm going to do the second one first. This term bridge brain is a term like the Lighthouse metaphor that's used to try to talk about something, and someone can present as if they have a bridge brain, and we especially find that women will do this in a workplace that's very strongly male-driven. They'll come to work, and this was something that my co-author pointed out very nicely, that they'll come to work and they'll appear to be a bridge brain. They'll act and react more male, but they'll go home and they're just who they are. And for many of those women, who they are is not a bridge brain, not highly aggressive, or whatever they would define as that bridge brain. So I think that some folks are not, but in one environment try to be, as an adaptation to that environment. And there are certainly skills to learn by adapting to that male-driven environment, but at a certain point, a lot of those women will leave that environment because they're having to change who they are. The first part about the research, it's happening right now. I mean, this is just like leading edge research into try to figure who these folks all are. If it happened by nature, in other words, in the first 2 steps, chromosome markers or in utero, then that's the nature of that person. And if we look back, we don't want to limit that person, but people will say, so a woman will say, well, let's see, when I was 4, I was a tomboy. I really liked playing with guys. I hated dolls. I didn't want to play with dolls. So didn't get as many sensorial hits, right? Wasn't into all the nerve fibers and soft stuff. Was more into physical and spatial, because that's what I hear. Like, I have 2 daughters, and one of them leans more toward tomboy. I don't hear not female. I just hear, a little more spatial. A little more spatial. Likes objects moving through space more, and likes to use her body more as an object moving through space, which is what more boys tend to do. They use their bodies as objects moving through space. She also may end up becoming an architect. She may end up becoming a mechanical engineer. That's very spatial. Architecture, mechanical engineering, right? You got to have well-developed spatials, or they have to be somewhat developed, and then you were given opportunities. So we would say that person probably, in one of those first 2 steps, probably, but that can't say for certain, right? Because we're not digging into those wombs. So we're just assuming that. And one of the reasons we can't assume that, by the way, last thing I'll say on that, is that with all this brain research, what happens is folks check it out by looking at kids who were not brought up by their parents, like kids who were adopted, or twins who are separated, who have similar genetics. They're brought up completely differently. Like, this twin over in China is brought up to be totally not a bridge brain, let's say, but ends up a bridge brain. So that's some of the research that says, wow, this genetic component is powerful. Thank you. Other questions? You're letting me off the hook on the tech side. Go ahead.
So based on your discussion so far, it sounds like you're describing as the bridge brain sort of gets the best of both worlds. But I was wondering if, through your work, you've actually noticed that sometimes bridge brains have more difficulty communicating because they don't meet these expectations.
That happens quite a bit, and I just want to make sure we're good on time. In fact, if someone signals me, we got 10 minutes left. Signal me if I'm getting, listen, I tell you, I got beat up a lot as a kid. I didn't fit with the mass of males. I was bad at sports, and it's not easy to be. It's not easy to be anybody, right? It's not easy to be a kid anywhere. Yes, there's a particular suffering for folks who are more toward the middle of the spectrum. A lot of the girls who are more toward the middle of the spectrum will report that they were not enjoyed and did not enjoy girl culture. So girl culture was hard on them because they didn't conform to girl culture, because they were different. And a lot of the men, will say, well, I got beat up a lot, or I wasn't treated very well by the mass of male culture that wasn't as emotional as I am, or wasn't as sensorial as I am. I'm very sensorial, I'm very emotional. They didn't get that. So there is a particular suffering reserved for each human being, and I think a particular suffering reserved for those of us who may be more toward the middle of the spectrum. So I wouldn't, at the same time, I don't think it's easy to be anyone. The talent set, ultimately where I think a lot of this is going, and this 1 hour we have is, I hope, just to intrigue you, because we cannot come to conclusions here, right? It takes immersion in this information and really studying it and Googling it to learn more about it, because there's a lot about it out there. At the other end, when that happens, I think that teams and corporations and firms, we know this from our success data, they end up finding the diversity of their talent, and they add the gender tool on to whatever it is that they are already doing in authentic leadership, in neurobusiness, whatever it is, in team building. They add the gender component, and the gender component diversifies it further, because now they see that gender can mean a number of things, and that gender is a lighthouse. So we approach this as, I wonder what that talent really is. What is all that talent that's inside you as a woman? What is all that talent inside you as a man? And that adds a beautiful part to the dialogue, and then the particular gifts of each individual come out further. But I would not tell you what those gifts are. That would just be bad. Those gifts come out because men and women understand each other better and can value each other better, and then all the talent gets retained. Go ahead.
So this is somewhat of a more controversial question, I guess.
We like controversy. Okay.
So you're saying we need to accept the differences in the brain, and that makes sense. And then we want to go in the next step. But so does this have anything to do with why we see many more boys interested in sciences and everything, or is that more cultural? What do you
Right.
think? Because there is a big problem where there aren't as many
Right.
girls interested in math, science, engineering, computer science.
I'm so glad you asked it. I was setting that up, all right? I was trying to get someone to ask that because of the science and technology. I'm going to answer it at a number of levels. One is I'm the father of 2 daughters, 18 and 15, right? So part of my inspiration for writing this book was to try to help create workplaces that were going to be conducive to their talent. And I'm actually not, I'm not of the mind that the workplace right now, all the workplaces right now are male dominant and males don't appreciate females. That's not what I see. What I see is that workplaces are not fully understanding the male and the female talent that they have. And so even though this book is both male and female, one of my own heart reasons for writing it was to help create a world for my daughters. Now, the honesty about the brain differences, I think should lead, and I believe already is leading, toward 3 or 4 steps of cultural change to accommodate some of the hidden science and technology talents of our girls. One is in the pipeline. There's a lot of discussion of that, I know there is here, about, okay, what do we do to help in the first 18 years of the kids' lives? So how do we help the parents help the girls to do more spatials? And we're very involved, if any of you know my other work, the Gurian Institute is really involved also in helping schools. So we're trying to help retrain folks at school to teach science to kids, mainly to girls who are not bridge brains, to teach science so that there's more manipulatives, more hands-on, so that the girls' brains are synapses, right? They're hitting more of those circuits so that they get more into that. So all the way at the very beginning, we're trying to get parents to understand that if you want more girls in science and technology, can't just talk about it. Got to actually get them doing spatial tasks if that's what we're looking for. And then if they don't go that direction, they don't go that direction. It's not like we're gonna remold the human spirit, but we got to at least affect the pipeline. The second thing we got to do is remember that probably the next biggest area of concern is recruiting. We're going to have to then recruit these women who have been brought up, and we have to look at how recruiting is done and how we specifically do it for young women. Then, third thing is retention and advancement of those young women who are engineers, who over the next 2 decades come through this pipeline. How are we going to retain and advance them? So retention is first. How do they get retained? They will gravitate toward jobs that they as individuals want. That will help retain them. How does the workplace understand them as women too, though, so that they feel valued, whatever they choose, whether it's industrial engineering or whether it's marketing of the engineering product, whatever it is, so they feel valued. Then fourth will be advancement. Okay, so how then do they advance to senior leadership positions? Because we know it's a circle, and if we don't have women at the top, we know that less women are going to come in anyway, so it's a circle. So there are really 4 big issues that we believe that this work is affecting: the pipeline, the recruiting, the retention, and then the advancement. I think it'll take about 20 years, and I think we will gradually then see more women in science and technology. There's one thing that I don't have the answer to, and that is a lighthouse, and that everyone here and elsewhere is going to have to work on, is how corporations are set up for women once they decide to have children. Because once they decide to have children, a lot of them start making other choices. Because a lot of our tech corporations, they're 70-hour work weeks. A lot of women and men too are going to start, well, I've just had a child. Things change. What do we do about that? That's something each corporation, I think, will deal with. Do we need to end? Should we end now? All right, we're going to end. I really appreciate being here. Did you get like a little glimpse? Yeah. Interesting, right? Thank you. Thanks for having me.